Okay,
Sounds
cool.
good to me. Here we are.
Cool.
Let's see. Hello, for everyone that's in the call already, thank you for joining. And over the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to put us on Facebook Live and make a post to Twitter. So please stay on the line and hold on tight real quick. Once again, for anybody that just joined us, I am putting us live on Facebook Live as well as advertising this webinar on Twitter. So hang tight and we'll get started in a few short minutes. Once again, for anybody that just joined us, I am putting us up on Facebook Live at the moment and also advertising us on Twitter. So if you just give us a few minutes, we will be starting the webinar. So hang tight. All right, here we are. Once again, thank you everyone for hopping on this call with us. Today, we are welcoming Jacob Baime. He is the Executive Director of the Israel on Campus Coalition, and he's going to dive in on the reality for Jewish students on campus right now, kind of the climate for pro-Israel activists, and how detractors have kind of revolutionized their strategies to adapt to the new COVID-19 crisis. So without further ado, Jacob, take it away.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you all for joining. And it's just an honor to be with you, first of all. I've said it before and I'll say it again. One of the most important developments in the American pro-Israel movement in the past couple of years has been the growth of Alums for Campus Fairness. The idea that, I've been doing this for about a dozen years now, this pro-Israel campus work. And if you go back as recently as a year ago, 2 years ago, before ACF was what it is today, there was always a need to engage alumni. There was always a need to educate and organize and ultimately activate alumni. But it's something that the American Jewish community, the American pro-Israel movement approached in sort of, as I've said, a ragtag kind of informal fashion. There was a nascent Alums for Campus Fairness group previously before it was professionalized to this extent, and Avi Gordon and Joel were hired. But it's just so much more today. And I do think it's one of the most important pieces of the pro-Israel movement today. And I can tell you that as the leader of the coalition of pro-Israel groups that are operating on college campuses in the United States, trying to build support for Israel, trying to strengthen this the connection between the United States and Israel, that it's been just remarkable to have ACF as a partner, and that every single time a critical situation comes up on campus, today pro-Israel alumni have a voice, and they have a platform, and they have an organized, sort of mechanized way to get involved. Just like, by the way, our adversaries have been doing for many years. So it's a really important development, and I just want to start by saying to each and every one of you, thank you. Thank you for being involved in this effort. We need you. And it's something that's incredibly meaningful. And it's going to become more important, I believe, in the months and the years ahead. So thank you. It's an honor to be here and to be close partners with you all. Now, It's been a while since I've had a conversation with alums for campus fairness in this format, and it's just remarkable to think about how much has changed. It's just extraordinary. And just a few months ago, we were beginning the spring semester. Just like any spring semester, we were anticipating a big surge in student government votes around boycotting and divesting from Israel, undermining the cause, initiatives that undermine the cause for peace. And then the pandemic hit. And by mid-March, late March, it became clear that it was going to be very serious. So now we're in this position where we have a whole coalition of organizations that are interested in this issue from various angles, that are operating on campus, that are supporting students on campus, and there isn't actually an on campus right now. So it's a unique moment, certainly a unique moment in recent memory. And so, and now a couple of months later, we have just concluded what I think is probably the most complicated and disorienting semester that I can imagine. And one of the questions becomes, what's actually happening around this issue set while the campuses are closed? Is it still a central theme of what we're facing on campus? Is it still a major issue? And the answer is a resounding yes. What we have seen is that our adversaries, the people who want to end the U.S.-Israel relationship, the people who want to undermine American support for Israel, are doubling down at this moment. It was true at the beginning of the Trump administration, when there was an increase in sort of disruption and divisiveness in our society, in this country, in our culture. And that has increased, tenfold, 100-fold since the pandemic began, and everything that has been unfolding since then. And our adversaries see in that an opportunity. They see an opportunity to exploit this environment to try and gin up hatred for Jews, hatred for Israel, to try and manipulate the narrative. And that's exactly what they're doing. If you were to take this current period that we're in right now, just looking at, for instance, the spring 2020 semester, and compare that to a year ago, the spring 2019 semester, there has been an exponential increase in the online activity, on the propaganda output, on the online in the online organizing of the vast coalition of groups that are looking to harm Israel and ultimately separate the American Jewish community, the American pro-Israel community, from the Jewish state. It's a coalition that is especially financially well equipped. There are something like 35 organizations, more than we have in our coalition, that are focused on defaming and undermining and delegitimizing the Jewish state in the United States. And what they are doing at this moment is pouring an unprecedented volume of very sophisticated, today, digital and virtual resources into this fight. So even today, when the semester is over, right? Even the virtual remote semester is now over at the vast majority of colleges and universities across the country. But the issues affecting those communities, these issues that are affecting those communities, have not died down. Quite the opposite. There's a big, nasty fight underway in the University of California system. There's a big, nasty fight underway at a school down south in Florida, in the Southeast, and so on and so forth. It continues. And what I think that we have tried to do as the pro-Israel movement on campus over the past few months during this very difficult period is that we've tried to rise to the occasion across our coalition. And one of the interesting, I think, defining features of this moment is that the discussions, the debates, the issues are still present in these campus communities. And the only thing that has changed is that we are not showing up on campus in person, just like our adversaries are not showing up on campus in person, because there's basically not a campus at the moment in most places. But a week and a half ago, you saw a BDS, a really nasty, hateful BDS resolution brought before the student government at the University of California, Davis. And the entire anti-Israel movement, activated, and professionals and lawyers, were involved in pushing that measure. And on our side, the same thing. Pro-Israel professionals, including from Alums for Campus Fairness, including from organizations like Stand With Us and like Hillel International and the local Hillel, and ICC, were engaged in the same way. And what kind of was striking to me about it is that everything that would have typically gone into a debate over these issues in a student government still happened, except actually showing up in person. So one of the pieces is that we've had to really adapt. Everyone involved in this conversation has had to adapt. And I think that when we discuss the path forward, when we consider the path forward, what is the fall semester going to look like? Acknowledging the fact that it's not as if there's a summer break and all the issues go away. Actually, we typically get a little bit of that, but that's not happening right now. That's not happening at this hour. But as we look towards the fall, setting that piece aside, I think that first of all, there is a known unknown that we are taking into account across our coalition, which is we don't know whether campuses are going to be open or closed. We just don't know. The Chronicle of Higher Education has published a tracker. They are on their website tracking, and I'm happy we can circulate the link afterwards, perhaps, if you're interested. But if you just go on Chronicle of Higher Education, they've got a COVID-19 status tracker, essentially. And every time an American college or university issues a statement about their plans for the fall, it's posted and it's cataloged and categorized. And what I've seen on there is that the vast majority of schools are saying, yes, we are going to open this fall, but also a whole bunch of them aren't sure what that's going to look like. I would say most of them aren't sure what that's going to look like. And we're just going to have to see. There's so much that's unknown in the public health situation right now that that is, as I say, in the category of a known unknown. There also, I think, are a couple of known knowns, if you will, that have to influence our thinking about the next academic year and the fall semester. The first known known is that there has been a big change in our global society as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The digital future that we have all been expecting, that we've all been counting on for so long, has arrived, but it has arrived way ahead of schedule. I saw someone comment, I think it was on CNBC or somewhere a few days ago, that it's like 3 or 4 or 5 years of growth in our technological proficiency and our digital focus have been compressed into just a couple of short months. And that's sort of the advance that we have had as a society. Joel and I were talking before the webinar got started about the fact that the organizations in our coalition have moved very effectively, I think, to a model that enables and empowers people to work remotely and still get a lot done. So I think that is a known that these advances have occurred. And even if the public health situation improves dramatically, that's not going to change. A new digital-centric age is here. And so we've got to think about that as we think about approaching these issues in the higher education space and in the pro-Israel advocacy space in the Jewish community. And we've got to adapt accordingly. And I think that the other known, the second known is that, as I suggested, our adversaries are pouncing on this moment, especially a moment of division in our society, in a moment when so many controversial issues are coming to the fore. And so, and there's so much emotion and so much heartache, especially over what's been happening the past couple of weeks. And they are going to do everything possible to exploit this moment. They are doing everything possible to exploit this moment. And we shouldn't kid ourselves that they are deploying the people who are committed to ending American support for Israel, to undermining the U.S.-Israel relationship, are very, very technologically savvy. And by the way, and maybe I'll end on this and then we can open up to more of a discussion. By the way, one of the ways in which they are technologically savvy and have been for actually some time, but are escalating that now, is that they are really good at organizing people across the United States who care about these issues and activating them to contact university officials when these issues arise in order to sway things in their direction. And they're doing it in a smart, online, virtual, digital fashion. And the bottom line is that Alums for Campus Fairness is a big part of our response to that. It's a big part of the pro-Israel community's response to that. It is not only answering those efforts in kind, but I believe exceeding those efforts and doing a better, more sophisticated, more professional job. So I want to pause there because I remember during our last conversation, I talked for like triple this amount of time, and there wasn't enough time to answer all the questions and get into more of a discussion. So Joel, I would be happy to kind of pause and go into questions and a discussion if you think that makes sense.
I think that makes sense. And I actually have a couple questions that one of our members submitted to us a couple of days ago. And then we also have a pre-prepared questions. But before we get into Q&A, I want to remind people that they can place their questions in the Q&A section in the Zoom webinar client window. And we will get to those, and you will actually be able to, I can answer the question if it can be typed by myself, or else I can also answer it live. So you will be notified on how it's going to be answered. And before I get into Q&A, I just want to show everyone what we're both wearing. Me and Jake are wearing our ICC, our Israel on Campus Coalition hats, pretty cool hats, and we're always repping Israel on Campus Coalition. Every single day I go on walks with this hat, so we're always repping Israel on Campus Coalition. So real quick.
Whoever asks the best question gets a free hat.
Yes. Actually, yes. I think that's actually a good idea. So we might, how about this? We'll pick a question at random because best might be subjective.
The hats are in storage right now is the reality because we're all remote at the moment. So, but
so we got to range
change soon.
So the first question I'm going to ask is actually from Victor Muslin. He is an alumnus of Columbia University. And he asked, what is the end goal of ICC pro-Israel and anti-Zionophobia advocacy on campus? And also, in addition to that, what are the success metrics, and can you do a deep dive into those metrics? Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Victor. And Victor is super active in the pro-Israel movement, and especially the campus corner of this movement. I'm in a bunch of like Facebook groups where Victor is super active, and I know, Victor, that you've done some just tremendous work. So thank you for that. What I would say is that I don't want to speak. We have a very broad and diverse coalition, and each organization in the coalition has a little bit of a different angle, a little bit of a different focus, and they have their own metrics and their own objectives. But if I had to generalize and say, you know, what are we trying to accomplish as this movement? I would say it's probably a few things. I think that the first is that we want to make sure that Jewish and pro-Israel students on college campuses across the United States, even on, you know, the remote campuses that are existing today, that they feel safe, that they feel supported, that they feel prepared to address these issues. So I think that's one important objective. That's really difficult to measure for all of us. But I think that anecdotally, we kind of a little bit know it when we see it. And I also know that for our part, ICC does our best to gauge how we're doing on that by taking a representative sample of the Jewish and pro-Israel students on the campuses across the United States, and at least every couple of years conducting a survey, a private anonymous survey of them, and just asking, asking about those issues and how they feel and are they supported and so on. So I think that's one piece. I think that another crucial component is that we want to undermine this notion of BDS, of, you know, the BDS campaign to boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel. And, you know, for me, one of the most poignant pieces of that discussion is that there are just so many examples of BDS harming the Palestinians, right? The biggest problem with these efforts to boycott and divest, and they're not actually boycotting and they're not actually divesting. It's symbolic. It's a propaganda campaign by and large, but that it undermines its stated objective, that it actually hurts the Palestinians. It actually harms their prospects for sovereignty. And so as someone who cares about Palestinians and believes that they deserve to live in a free and prosperous and safe and healthy society, I'm very concerned about the extent to which BDS undermines that. And so certainly one of our objectives is to prevent these manipulative, super well-financed, super well-resourced professionals who are coming to the campus and driving this campaign against Israel and against the Jewish state, to try and prevent them from scoring propaganda wins in their global war to end Israel, which is the ultimate goal of these efforts. And so I think that's a really important piece. And yeah, that's really hard to measure too, Victor, as you know. I think that certainly one metric are the BDS referendum and referendum campaigns succeeding or failing. But I think that's almost too simplistic a measure. There are a number of other sort of critical points that emerge, if you will, over the course of any given semester, where we have a good sense of whether they are succeeding and their message is resonating, or the truth is coming out. We are making the facts known, and it does not. And then I think the third goal, and again, this is all super general because this is a diverse, broad coalition here that spans the ideological spectrum in the Jewish community and so on and so forth. But I think that our third goal is that we want students in general who are not invested in this issue, and not just students, but the other people who are influenced by the notion of this being discussed on campus and its resonance beyond campus, which I think it does resonate in a big way, is for them to appreciate Israel's positive contributions to the world. One of the things that's been really, I guess, heartwarming to me, as much as anything can be heartwarming about COVID-19, but the fact that Israel has made so many technological and scientific advances and is putting its best minds and tons of funding and resources and organizations into doing everything possible to solve this crisis, not just for Israel, but for the world. And that for me has been inspiring. And to see just all of the contributions that Israel has made to the world in respect of COVID-19, certainly, but also beyond, it is just amazing. Israel is a force for good in this world. It is a light onto the nations on so many levels, in so many ways. Now, Israel is not perfect. No country is perfect. No person is perfect. No country is perfect. And like the United States, Israel and Israelis understand that it is an unfinished project. That there's always room to grow. There's always room to improve. But that said, by the metric of any, by the standard of any country on this planet, let alone a tiny democracy that is surrounded by enemies, that has been in a state of emergency since the moment of its inception, since before the moment of its inception, has been responsible for so many advances that are helping improve the lives of human beings. That is something that I think is extremely important. It is a story that is sometimes underappreciated outside of the small groups, small contingents of people who are very committed to this, discussion on one side or the other. But I think that's another objective, is just to do everything that we can to the extent that we can get people to pay attention, to help them understand that Israel is making tremendous contributions to this world. And that's something that the people in this room can feel really good about.
Thank you for that. I think that was a really in-depth answer. And attaching to the end of your explanation is kind of an evaluation of where we are in those metrics and how we're faring. So the question is, are we doing better or worse in terms of long-term outlook? And I think you've explained this before in other settings, and I would love for you to give the real answer and then the motivational kind of where we can go and what we know we can do answer.
Well, I think that if you look at opinion polling, which is not the metric, but it's one important metric. I think that if you look at opinion polling, it is not accurate to assert that American support for Israel is diminishing. That's simply not accurate. And I don't actually believe that it's accurate to say that it's diminishing among young people either. What we do know, based on the data, is that the vast majority of people are not thinking about this issue, right? They don't necessarily appreciate how Israel's contributions may affect their daily lives, and they certainly don't. The vast majority of Americans, I believe, and certainly we see that in campus communities, have a strong feeling about this issue. But to the extent that we've been engaged in these discussions, our coalition, in student governments across the country, in all different contexts, with university leaders, with trustees, I don't see support for Israel eroding. So I think that, I also don't think that there's sort of a finite, like gate that we have to pass through, and that then we'll know we've won. Like there's sometimes an inclination to think of it that way. What does winning look like? I kind of think that's a false construct. I think that this is a conversation that has been going on for decades. I think it's very likely to continue for decades. And as long as, the United States and Israel are intertwined in this deep relationship that's built on shared values, that's built on common interests, this is a discussion that's going to continue in the United States. But so all of it is to say, I don't think we're doing worse, Joel. I don't think we're doing worse. I think that what we've seen on the part of our coalition is, in the face of a huge onslaught that I think has escalated certainly over the past 12 years that I've been doing this work on campus, it's escalated. But the resources and the professional apparatus that's hyper coordinated, that's super interconnected, that's very, very sophisticated, in terms of the way they are pushing this just absolutely baseless propaganda on campus. In light of that, I think that we have responded across our coalition in many different ways across the various organizations, with creativity, with smarts, with compassion. And I'm actually fairly optimistic that we are going to be able to adapt, that we are going to be nimble, just like our adversaries are. And we're going to continue to make sure that the truth about Israel, that the truth about the U.S.-Israel relationship gets out there. Again, not an Israel is perfect message, but an honest message, which is certainly not what the purveyors of this hatred on campus are espousing. And again, I come back to that notion that if you really care about Palestinian rights, if you really care about Palestinian sovereignty, trying to distance the United States and the American people from Israel does everything to undermine that and not to advance it. And so I think that is an argument that is accurate. I think it is verifiably accurate if you just have a cursory understanding of history, including of Israel's past very generous gestures for peace that have been rebuffed violently. But I think that I think that actually I'm fairly optimistic for the future. But again, it's a never-ending conversation, and we're going to have to continue to work very hard. We're going to have to continue to be very smart about it. We're going to have to continue to be very creative and nimble. And we're also going to have to make sure that we emphasize research and analysis and a clear-eyed view of what is actually happening in these discussions at colleges and universities across the United States. It changes very quickly. I think that we are in a period right now. We have been in a period for some time in this country, and it's only accelerating, that the pace of change has accelerated. whereas changes in our society that would have taken years previously are sometimes happening in days or weeks. And it's generally unexpected. And you know, the shift to a digital centric society is one of those pieces. That's one example, but only one from the past many years. Thomas Friedman has spoken very eloquently about this, and others. And so I think not only are we in this phase of American society and sort of global society where the pace of change among just human beings has accelerated, but also the pace at which it's accelerating is accelerating. So I think the hardest part, you know, which gets to the heart of the question maybe, is how do you plan, right? How do you plan? And the answer essentially is that it's very difficult to plan for any extended period of time. You have got to be constantly monitoring outputs, outcomes, reactions, and adjust in real time. And that's just the world we're living in today. And it's not the model that we have traditionally applied to these issues, but it is increasingly the model that we are applying by necessity in the pro-Israel movement on campus. You know, I'll give you just one super interesting example. I was talking yesterday with, I think it was yesterday. Yeah, yesterday. I was talking with a official at JNF. It's one of our partner organizations, one of the groups in our coalitions, Jewish National Fund. And, you know, JNF does so much important work. And many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with JNF. But I've been just super impressed by the way they have adapted and kind of turned on a dime in this environment. So a lot of the groups that we work with in our coalition and that are campus focused and not campus focused are taking Americans over to Israel and trips over to Israel. And what JNF is doing, maybe uniquely among the groups in our coalition, I don't think I've heard of other examples of this. They are actually organizing virtual trips to Israel now. You pay for a seat on the bus and you spend a week touring Israel virtually. And one of the remarkable pieces about it is that those of us who are involved in this space, and trips and travel to Israel is a big thing, know that the folks who are working in the tourism industry in Israel have been especially hard hit by this pandemic. And what JNF is doing, which I found heartwarming and just smart and cutting edge, is that they're actually using that opportunity of the virtual trips to Israel to provide income to the tour guides that they would have typically worked with on the ground in Israel. That is a smart, forward-leaning, unusually creative response to the current situation. And you just love to see something like that. There are other examples like that that give me confidence that in this very disrupted, quickly changing world, our prospects are actually still very strong, especially because the truth is on our side.
Thank you. Very concise answer. And I actually have a very from the crowd. It's from one of our alumni, Viv Grossman. She has a very poignant question relating to the kind of climate right now, floating around the world, and especially in United States politics at the moment. And she's concerned about the kind of intersectionality of, I guess, priorities between the Movement for Black Lives organization and the BDS movement. And she wants to know, where do you see this going on campuses?
Sure. Well, I actually know Viv, and that's great. Viv is also an extraordinary leader in the pro-Israel movement and has also focused on campus issues and beyond. Actually, Viv is super involved with JNF, which is doing that awesome initiative that I just mentioned. So it's a great question, Viv, and it's obviously something that we are thinking a lot about. I'm sorry for the noise. My window's open here. That's the whole work from home thing. But it's something that we are thinking a whole lot about, and this is actually, you know, very serious. First of all, what I would assert, which I think is totally true, is that there are deep and abiding ties between the Jewish and the Black communities in the United States. There's just no question about that. And the Jewish community in the United States during the civil rights movement was at the vanguard of pushing for change. American Jews gave their lives for the movement to enfranchise Black people in this country. And today, you also see Jews on the front lines of this discussion. And it is obvious that though we have made extraordinary progress in this country over the past decades, it's not enough. It's just not enough. And it's not making a partisan political comment, but we clearly need to do more. When you see what's transpired over the past couple of weeks, it's just the latest example of a tremendous difficulty that a group of people in our country are having. And as Jews, as pro-Israel Americans, it's something that we can relate to very strongly. Being the other, being in a minority. And I do think that we have a moral obligation to show up and to be there. When you talk about intersectionality, one of the things that our adversaries have done really well and very, very dishonestly is show up as self-identified opponents of Israel, as self-identified supporters of the BDS campaign. They have shown up in a very visible and vocal way for other minority and other oppressed and marginalized communities in the United States. I also think that we are doing a really good job of that as an American Jewish community, as the pro-Israel movement on campus. When I see the video of George Floyd, when I saw the many, many similar instances of that kind of interaction previously, my heart breaks. And I'm a super emotional person in general, and I cry when I see that stuff. It's awful. And so I think it's going to be very important for us to continue to show up as a Jewish and pro-Israel community and say, we are with you. This is not okay. When it comes to these discussions on campus, it's not enough to wait until a BDS resolution comes to a student government and then reach out to the various interest groups and ethnic and social minority groups on campus and say, support us. You got to be building those relationships long term. I think that a group like Hillel is doing a phenomenal job of that on campuses across the country. I'm really proud when I see Hillel showing up and reaching out. We also, which maybe speaks to Viv's question a little bit, we also certainly see anti-Israel activists in a very cynical fashion trying to exploit this moment and exploit these issues and what happened with George Floyd and the aftermath. And they are trying in what I believe is a really anti-Semitic fashion to blame Israel for the difficulties that Black people in the United States have had when it comes to policing. It is anti-Semitic on its face. It is patently absurd. But that is a notion which has gone by the headline of deadly exchange, if you want to Google it. That is a notion that our adversaries are advancing at this hour. And it's something that we have to contend with. But I continue to believe that as with the issues in general, the truth is on our side. We have a long, long history in this country of an alliance between Black Americans and Jewish Americans. And it continues to this day. I know because of all of my friends in the Jewish and pro-Israel communities, and beyond, who are taking a really important leadership role in this effort to say that everyone deserves to be treated equally under the law. I will say that at this moment, maybe one of the concerns that I have is that we need to continue to advance the First Amendment and free speech. And we cannot allow Israel's adversaries in this country to undermine our ability to oppose their hateful efforts. We're going to have to continue exercising a bunch of free speech as our own, as Jews and pro-Israel Americans who are being targeted by a really vicious campaign that you have to understand is one component. It's just one component of a global coalition that is arrayed against Israel with the goal of Israel's destruction. That coalition includes state actors, It includes non-state actors like terrorist organizations, and it certainly includes non-governmental organizations like the ones that are bringing this vitriol to the students, to the undergraduate students in this country.
Thank you for that in-depth answer. And yeah, I think it's an important answer, and it's an important question, topic, issue that we're going to be dealing with at least until the election and probably far after the election. So thank you for touching on that. Before I move on to the next question, Judith Friedman, I see your question. That's actually a great question, and I'm going to use that for the last question of the webinar. So just want to let you know that we are going to get to it. So the next question that I'm going to ask is, as online campus anti-Semitism are on the rise, what are some ways students and faculty can work to combat hate?
It's a good question. Well, first of all, become active in the governance structures of a college or university. Our adversaries have targeted the student governments at campuses across the country because they believe that student governments are an incredibly effective platform for amplifying their propaganda. They don't believe that if the University of California at Davis, like we talked about earlier, if their student government adopts a BDS resolution, that it's going to have some immediate economic or other significant impact on Israel. They're not doing it for that reason. They're doing it because they firmly believe that of all of the platforms available to them in the United States, that the student governments, the undergraduate student governments in particular, although they have on occasion targeted graduate student associations and unions like TA unions and others as well, that those undergraduate student governments are one of the most effective platforms for the amplification of their message, which is a false message. It is a misleading message. It is a message that hurts the Palestinian people. And it's something that is going to continue. But so one of the things that we have to think about when it comes to the people who are actually on campus is that we have to be involved in those institutions too. And I don't think that we should be involved in those institutions from a particularist perspective, from a self-interested perspective. Students who are pro-Israel and Jewish, or happen to be pro-Israel and Jewish, should engage in student governments and be involved with other governance and leadership structures on their campuses because they care about their communities. You know, it's not they're going to run for student government because they want to oppose BDS. But what we have noticed, I think, on campuses across the country is that when the pro-Israel and the Jewish voices are absent from the discussion, these initiatives are able to succeed sometimes with little resistance, because remember, the vast majority of people are just not focusing a lot on these issues. You know, the average student senator at a college or university in the United States is focused on the tangible issues that are affecting the students on campus, not somewhat abstract issues of international concern. And so it's incumbent on us as pro-Israel and Jewish Americans to make sure that we are involved in those leadership structures in the same way that there are very impressive efforts in this community to make sure that every member of Congress is educated on these issues and has a chance to hear from people who have a different perspective from those who want to end American support for Israel. That's happening on campus as well. And it's not only a self-interested perspective. It's because the pro-Israel community and the Jewish communities care about their local communities at large. And so to see more and more pro-Israel students across the country run for student government and win those offices, to me, that's very encouraging, and it's something that's very important. Another piece that we have to think about a little bit is that there is a set of administrators who have on campuses across the country who have an outsized impact on our issues. These are people who are deans of students, who are deans of diversity and equity and inclusion, the officers, the officials who are focused on these issues, they need some education. They need some basic education about what is anti-Semitism? What is racism against Jews? What is the difference between critiquing a policy of the Israeli government on the one hand and denying the right of the Jewish people and the Jewish people alone to self-determination? It strikes me that when a student has to show up at a campus, whether it's remotely or in person, and feels that she or he has to shed the Zionist component of her or his Jewish identity in order to be accepted on campus, that is a major civil rights issue. That is a major issue when it comes to Jewish civil rights. So first of all, we need to get involved in the governance and leadership structures, not only because we care about Israel, but because we care about our communities, which we do. We need to do more as the Jewish and pro-Israel communities to educate these mid-level, very influential administrators to just try and help them understand our perspective. Because, without experience, that doesn't come naturally. It's nothing against those administrators or those officials. And I think that those are two of the very, very important pieces here. And then finally, we've got to understand that this is a civil rights issue. When a Jew feels that she or he can't show up on campus and be accepted without shedding the Zionist component of their Jewish identity, that is a huge problem. And one of the ways that I think about it, and I'm a student of Eliza Lewin at the Brandeis Center, the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. No affiliation with my alma mater, Brandeis University, but one of the things that that Eliza has taught me is that if you think about it this way, I think it's interesting and compelling. Just because some Jews do not observe Shabbat, or just because some Jews do not practice kashrut, that doesn't mean that Shabbat and kashrut are not essential, fundamental components of Jewish identity. And it is impossible to, with an honest reading of Judaism and Jewish history, to argue successfully that Zionism, that Israel is not an absolutely fundamental, essential component of Judaism. So just because you have some fringe radical extremists out there in the Jewish community also who are saying, well, we've got to separate Judaism from Zionism. Well, if they don't want to be Zionists personally, that's one thing. But for them to assert that Zionism is not a component of Judaism is, in my mind, not only just patently false on its face, but it's also racist against Jews. And it's something that we need to keep in mind, and it's something that has profound legal implications in this country as well.
Thank you. In the fight on campus, what have you seen to be the most effective strategic initiatives in combating BDS and anti-Israel hate?
Well, I think there's certainly something to be said for this shift to digital, this shift from in-person to digital on the one hand. It was already happening. It was already happening big time before the COVID-19 pandemic and before the current unrest and discomfort that we're feeling right now. But it has certainly accelerated. And so one very important piece is that if you want to reach the generation that is being targeted by anti-Israel activists today, that is on campus today, there's got to be a digital component. Viv asked a question before. Viv has been instrumental in a bunch of these very forward-leaning social media initiatives that are engaging, but frankly, not only people in our typical target audience, but engaging people who care about this issue in all demographics across the country. So I think that's one piece that's really important, is the fact that the conversations have to happen in person and on the ground, but they've also got to happen virtually. You've got to reach people where they are. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that we're actually doing a fairly good job of that. The other piece, which is maybe a little more conceptual, but I think it's fundamental to this discussion, is that for a very long time, since as long as Israel has existed and before, there's been an anti-Israel movement in the United States. And for the vast majority of that time, we have approached the challenge of that anti-Israel movement, which has taken many forms. The current, nomenclature and form is BDS, but there have been others. It's just an extension of, it's a modern day extension of the Arab boycott of Israel. But I think that for most of that history, we have approached this challenge as either an educational challenge, let's just get some talking points and information out to the people on campus, and that will win the day for us, or as a community relations challenge. We just need to engage in dialogue with the people who are bringing these campaigns to campus. And if we do enough of that, and if we do it well enough, we will win them over, or we will at least neutralize their outward activism. And I don't believe that either of those frames is sufficient. I think that it certainly is an educational challenge. I think that it certainly is a community relations challenge. And there are groups in our coalition that are doing a really, really good job on those efforts. But what I would argue is that education, community relations are necessary, but not sufficient. Our adversaries approach this not principally as an educational or cross-community engagement, community relations campaign. They approach this as a political campaign, as a fast-moving, multifaceted, sophisticated political campaign. And there are many components to executing an effective political campaign. Our adversaries have mastered the vast majority of them, and we have got to do the same. That means a lot of different things in a lot of different situations. It means being creative and flexible, as I think that our coalition is and has been. But so I think, I know that latter piece is kind of a very more cerebral, conceptual piece, but I think it's very important that just to understand that our efforts at educating, our efforts at building, better community relations, intercommunal relations, those are necessary, but they are not sufficient. We have got to build and activate the same kind of sophisticated political capabilities that our adversaries are activating. And again, it comes back to, and the reason I agreed to speak for ACF twice in, a short period of time, is that one of the important political tools that we can activate is to have a big network of people who care about these issues, who are organized by the particular colleges and universities they care about, and constantly educate and engage those individuals, and then as needed, activate them. And our adversaries have been great at that for many years. I think they've been good at it and very good at it for longer than we have even been doing it in a sophisticated fashion. But now we are catching up. And at least when it comes to the alumni side of it, ACF is doing a remarkable job, and I'm proud of ACF. And it's so I guess one of the answers is that when an alum from any given college or university calls a development office or an admissions office, first of all, you might think that you're just one voice, and are they really going to care? They do care. If you have worked in any of those offices, you know that one phone call can make a difference. But also that ACF is going way beyond that and saying, we're going to activate the masses of people who care about these issues, who are connected to that particular college or university. So I think obviously that's a very important intervention as well. And that's why I'm here.
Thank you for that. And I would like to reiterate that we actually couldn't do the work that we do with our alumni without the support of your coalition, without organizations within your coalition that are all working towards the common goal of combating BDS, combating anti-Israel hate, anti-Semitism, and making campus a safer, but also much more prosperous environment for the success of Jewish and pro-Israel students. So thank you for that. And I think we can end it with one last question, and it basically touches on what Judith Friedman and Alan Lansnover are getting at, which is, we can always, donate online to organizations that we might be fond with, but what do we do between now and the fall, especially in this changing climate? We don't even know if schools are going to be coming back in the fall. What can alumni actually do, and what do you feel would be the best way to use our alumni resource?
Thank you, Joel, and thank you, Judith and Al, for the question. And what I would say is a few things. For one thing, I mean, you mentioned it, Joel, but yeah, I mean, this movement needs resources, 100%. I mean, it does not operate without funding. You can't hire a staff. You can't buy the software you need. You can't do the outreach and the education and the activation without resources. So certainly that's a piece. We have to spend the summertime building our capacity and strengthening our movement for the fall. And certainly our adversaries are doing that. And again, we may have a particularly unusual summertime during which these issues remain very, very active. That's it's only June, but typically about this time, like I'm taking my paid time off, and we're starting to take a little bit of a breather after a very, very difficult semester, and that period of quietude and unsettledness has not come so far, and it's behind schedule. So first of all, we may have a very active summer. In addition to the fact that we've got to spend all of our time in the next few months building capacity for what I think, as we approach the November 2020 election, is going to be an escalating crisis and conflict over these issues. It's going to continue to be a very fraught and very difficult conversation. Another thing I would say is that I think that I would guess that although Alums for Campus Fairness has thousands upon thousands of members organized by college and university across the country, that we are still only touching a very small percentage of the American Jewish and pro-Israel communities. I'd be surprised if it exceeded 1%. And that's not a commentary on ACF, that's a commentary on the opportunity that we have to engage a lot more people in this effort. We went in a couple of years, we went from having almost no one on the alumni side involved in this issue in a super professional and organized way, to then Avi was hired. Now we have Joel, and you now have thousands and thousands of people who are organized as a super effective force. Finally, in the alumni space on our side, on the side of the people who care about the truth and who actually care about Palestinian lives and want peace. So I actually think that one of the most important things that we can do in the coming weeks and months is we've got to reach out to our friends and just get them signed up. We've got to involve more people who care about this issue. I think a lot of them just don't realize there are some super productive outlets for their energy and for their efforts in this space. So I would say that one of the more important pieces is we've got to think about how do we double, how do we triple the size of this movement? And the alumni side of it is going to be a crucial, extremely important piece of it. And so I think we've got to really focus on how do we, over the next few months, build our capacity to continue to do this creative, sophisticated political work, especially in this new digital age. And I think we've also got to do a lot of thinking about what are the ways in which we can broaden our base in order to, what are the ways in which we can broaden our base in order to increase our impact? And so I think that's the path forward. And what I would say again is that I know that it's a hard road ahead. There's no question. These are difficult days and these are very, very challenging conversations. But when I look at what ACF is doing, when I look at what the organizations across, like I mentioned, JNF and the organizations across our coalition, the way they're innovating, the way they're showing up, I actually am optimistic for the future. And I think that we are going to strengthen the U.S. Israel relationship over the next number of years, rather than see it decline. And we're going to have to work around the clock to do that, but that's what we're prepared to do.
And thank you for your support. Thank you for your partnership. And thank you for providing a lot of good and useful information to our alumni members. And thank you for hopping on another webinar with us. And hopefully we look to see you again in the near future, or maybe farther future. But once again, be safe during this crisis and have a wonderful day. Everyone at home, have a wonderful day. And we'll see you next week for our next webinar.
Thank you, Joel. Take care.
You too.